and talk to a couple of folks here about kind of the difference between different and dangerous. Joining us, Dr. Kenneth Duckworth. He's a psychiatrist, but the medical director for the National Alliance on Mental Illness. He's also an assistant clinical professor at Harvard University Medical School. And also we have with us an exceptional young woman who has been a pleasure to talk to before the show tonight. This is Savannah Loxton Breakstone, who wrote a blog this week that caught our attention. It was a post on her blog that she's maintained for several years. It was titled, "I was one of the scary kids," emphasis on was, and it was just a very personal account. When I asked you, Savannah, to describe yourself to me earlier, you said autism with an anxiety disorder, and you talked to me a little bit about being what you call a scary kid. I guess first, what do you mean by a scary kid? How long ago was that, and what does that mean?
So, scary kid really isn't defined by diagnosis or anything. It's about behaviors.
Right.
It's usually things that scare other people, like parents or other caregivers. In my case, I was somebody who I didn't have the skills to cope with my emotions or with stressors or anxiety. And I mean, I would throw things, I would open the door in a moving car with the intention of jumping out. I would say things that my mother found terrifying. And this was all between the ages of 8 and 14.
So what changed? I know you've talked about your mother and her role in your life.
Yeah, I mean, there's several, things that were really big. I mean, number one is I learned new skills. And one of the more important skills, I think, that I learned was about self-advocacy and gaining that sense of, the sense that I had an ability to have some control over what was happening to me and the way that my life was going. And my mother never gave up on me, and she, at first, it started out with, she started taking me to meetings because she didn't feel safe leaving me with babysitters. She was very active in mental health advocacy at that time. And then she started, asking me questions during the breaks about what I thought about what I overheard during the meetings. And then eventually she started asking me to be a full participant. And I mean, all this started while my behaviors were at their most severe.
And I want to bring in the doctor in just a second here, but real quickly, when you started to hear kind of off-the-cuff diagnoses thrown around by people about the person accused of this massive shooting, this horrible event, when you started hearing labels put on him that are not confirmed, we don't know his history, what did that do to you? Because just that, how did that make you feel when you heard those?
I mean, we hear, off-the-cuff diagnoses at every tragedy, but the responses for this one, I mean, there have been some truly terrifying responses that are, I mean, there's no other word for some of the responses. I mean, I've seen people talking about how people with certain diagnoses should all be rounded up, how pages joking about how if they get enough followers, they're going to go out and find an autistic kid and burn him to death. I mean, this particular round has been horrible.
Doctor, that's scary to hear. What are the dangers in kind of armchair diagnosis in a situation like this? What have you seen in the past week that concerns you?
To make a diagnosis of a psychiatric disorder, you actually have to take a fair bit of time, attention, review of history, records. So I place no faith whatsoever in what's been said so far. Until there's a clinical review or a clinical record produced, um, I don't think that we can work off of, a sketchy third or fourth hand report. I've frequently done evaluations of people who arrive with a certain diagnosis because that's what someone thought they might have had 10 years ago. And then I take a look at them and I have a very different view of their condition. So I think one of the things that's important that you've done tonight is bring someone like Savannah on board, because Savannah represents the vast majority of people's experience, which is that people get better very commonly. And I think that's really one of the important things that you're doing tonight. Savannah's a great story, and I want to say thank you to Savannah for sharing your story. People can learn, kids can learn coping mechanisms, strategies to manage emotion. I don't know anything about this story, but it's obvious coping skills around emotion weren't part of the equation. And I feel like, unlike the person who was speaking earlier, the National Alliance on Mental Illness is quite concerned about access to mental health services across the country. We don't feel that access to mental health services is easy to get or routine or easy to construct. And so we have a crisis, a public health crisis around child and adolescent mental health. If you have a mom like Savannah has, and you have grit and determination, you can often do very well. But sometimes it can be difficult to find the services that you need, either in the school or in the professional community. And that remains a concern to me from a public health point of view.
Yeah, and if you're online and you're ignorant and you hear something tossed out there as a label for the individual in this instance that is the same label someone might put on Savannah, there is a wide range, a huge difference in what she's been able to accomplish and something else that's inaccurate in the first place.
If you meet one person, you've met one person. If you meet one person with bipolar disorder, you've met one person. If you meet one person with Asperger's spectrum or Asperger's syndrome or autistic spectrum disorder, each individual is a confluence of strengths, vulnerabilities, areas they need to grow, family supports, and triggers and risks. So the idea is to take each individual as themselves. Yeah. Looking at a diagnosis as an explanation for a phenomenal, heartbreaking problem is shorthanded and is missing the fundamental point, which is that violence is a substantial problem in our society.